Hi folks, welcome to Wednesday's edition of the I Write Radio podcast stroke videocast. We're going to cover quite a lot of Scotland and a wee bit of America today. So we'll have a chat about the press conference as we normally do. Stewart found time to watch both a COVID committee meeting with the First Minister and had a quick peek into the inquiry into the handling of the Alex Salmond inquiry. And I'll give you an update, having kept my eyes open most of the night on the American situation.
Are you feeling all right after all that?
I was a bit shattered this morning, I have to be honest.
I was thinking psychologically. I mean, you don't take a lot of battery and watch all that.
It was not very cheerful, put it that way. Well, we'll get to it when we talk about it.
Okay.
But let's kick off with your two reports, the Salmond inquiry and the COVID committee.
Well, we'll do them in time then. Yesterday was the Salmond inquiry, also known as the Sturgeon inquiry. There was let me bring it up. Rebecca McQuillan wrote a piece for the Holyrood magazine, which is usually quite informative and is a long way away from being a tabloid. What she's writing about is Alex Salmond documents published by the Harassment Committee is her headline. 150 pages of documents. The committee had warned the First Minister that his views, the perspective on his perspective might not be taken fully into account unless he complied with forwarding these documents in a hurry. So he got scalped on that basis.
So are these the documents that they were refusing to produce because they thought they might be in contempt of court?
Good question. She doesn't go that far. They do outline what happened, but they provide the background between what happened when it first became public that the former First Minister was the subject of sexual allegations in the Daily Record. So but by that time, Mr. Salmond already had lawyers on the case, and they'd already been trying to get, they'd offered mediation, offered arbitration. So it's the correspondence about that. Here's a quote. In a letter of May 18th, 2018, the Permanent Secretary Leslie Evans, to the Permanent Secretary Leslie Evans, lawyer David McKee of Levy and McRae, that's Salmond's lawyers, details concerns around both the competency and the fairness of the process, including contesting that a new complaints procedure, not in place when the incidents allegedly occurred, could be retrospectively applied, suggesting the process was unfair due to an ongoing lack of access to evidence. So it's kind of the background documents to that part of the process.
Right.
It also contains a letter. What does it say? A letter by the lawyer reminding the First Minister of her duty of confidentiality. So they didn't get, it all happened in a few days in August 23rd. And that day, the lawyer sent an email to Evans in response to an email from the Permanent Secretary. Your letter purports to make this process public and provides us and our client with fewer than 3 hours notice of your intentions. So they went for judicial review because they didn't get a chance to get an interdict to keep it out of the public domain.
I don't see why they wouldn't be quite happy to release that.
No, you're right. I don't. Yes, you're very right to ask that. Neither do I. But the detail is interesting. Maybe it's more, to me, it's more damaging to the Permanent Secretary. I mean, they seem to be, the leak to the Daily Record almost certainly came out of the Permanent Secretary's office. I don't know how big her office is and how many staff she's got in it. And everything seems to be rushed through. It's, you know, it's as if to say the evidence in this tranche of documents seems to suggest that they want, well, obviously somebody in that department wanted the knowledge of this harassment complaint, plural, shall we say, public. They weren't fussy about the legal niceties. They just wanted it public.
I just feel that the whole thing, including the trial, there's a distinct lack of natural justice here. You know, the argument about accusations of, people accused of rape being anonymous, as well as the victims stroke accusers having anonymity. And this case definitely is highlighting good reason for that. I mean, Salmond's career, okay, let's suggest it wasn't over. Let's go with the theory that he might have been making a comeback. He's been totally destroyed with this because he wasn't given the same rights, it appears, as the accusers. Well,
that's why I used the term compromise when I first heard of it. You know, once the thing is, the allegation is public, if it's a sexual allegation, you're finished.
Well, unless you're a Tory.
All right, maybe unless you're a Tory, but essentially it is a weapon. It's a nuclear weapon. You can't bring it back into you can't make it secret once it's public. And it would
the only way you can bring it back is to basically prove that the people who are making the accusations are lying through their teeth, as was the case with that guy down south. Do you remember that was on about the paedophile ring?
That took years, didn't it?
Yeah, I know, but in the end, when he was proven to be a serial liar and a fantasist, that some of the people who were accused and severely damaged by it got something back from it. Although, you know, there's still that muddle stick thing.
So what this article seems to say to me is, here's a quote by the lawyers here, and they were trying to get it to stop it going public, because once you went public, as I say, a sexual allegation, blah, blah. We therefore seek your undertaking that no statement will be issued this afternoon until the question of an interdict has been determined. Later that day, the Daily Record newspaper contacted Alex Salmond to say the story had been leaked to them. Now, that was a crucial day in Alex Salmond's life.
Oh, yeah. But can the Scottish Government or the civil service be held responsible for that leak when there's no proof of where it came from? You know,
where's the investigation into that leak?
Well, I'm going to presume that when something like that is leaked, the civil service immediately go looking for the person responsible. I mean, how often do people who leak things in a government sense actually get caught, unless it's, you know, state secrets? And how much damage? I mean, you've got somebody sitting in cabinet at the moment who leaked defense secrets, Gavin Williamson, and he's back in government, 18 months after it happened. I mean, remember May threw him out of government.
Yeah, I know. Well, that story goes on and on.
Okay. So what about the COVID committee? What did you make of that?
It was quite interesting this morning. I forgot it was on, so I missed the first 3/4 of an hour. It's quite cosy. It was in a small committee room. First Minister was there, Chief Medical Officer was there. The committee was chaired by Donald Gorry. I think it's Donald Gorry, a Tory convener. He was chairing it. There weren't any huge fireworks. One of the topics that did come up, which was a bit of a reveal, you could say, Mark Ruskell, I had the Green MSP, was asking, he started his questions just as I switched on. Apparently, we've discovered that there is question. They've started this mass testing in Liverpool. There is also mass testing going on in Slovakia. We got a little bit more details about that. They're not using PCR testing, which is the reliable testing method they use in this country. The question that always annoys you, the issue that always annoys you, Norry, and quite rightly, is you can have a test on Tuesday and you could still be infected on Wednesday and spreading it around. The First Minister made that clear, because even some people still don't seem to get that. There is a possibility that the mass testing going on in Slovakia, again, it's a pilot, is antibody testing, which the First Minister was quite interested in. She seemed to think, well, we'd be interested in that. What else?
There was an interesting, I think he's an Oxford University professor, on Newsnight the other night, saying that there's 3 of these quicker tests, which are all kind of high 90s. I mean, over 99% accurate. So there's 1 false positive in 1,000, basically. So that test is a lot quicker. So he would seem to be pretty upbeat about the usefulness of the test. So if you're going to test the whole population, I mean, what does it give you? It gives you an accurate figure of the prevalence of the virus in the population as a whole.
If you would ask me to think, imagine a year ahead from now, and where would we be with the virus and the pandemic, I would think by then we'll be in the middle of a mass vaccination exercise and/or mass testing combination.
Well, I mean, he was also pretty upbeat about a vaccination. And it's turned out there was a headline in one of the papers this week about the NHS in Scotland planning to vaccinate NHS staff in December. He seemed fairly confident that there was, again, 6 vaccines that looked promising. The rider being to it that they hadn't finished their testing phase yet. But he seemed pretty confident that one of them would work, or a combination of 2 of them might be effective. So there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel, at least for NHS staff, which would suggest that production of it is going to be a problem, because that'll be the next blind spot. I think, for the mainstream media. We'll get a vaccine, they'll expect it to be rolled out next Tuesday, and they'll just ignore the fact that, you know, it's got to be manufactured. And the
logistics of it got to be shared out. But if you can guarantee if you're rich, you'll get it first because you'll be able to pay for it.
Well, these quick tests are apparently available for £120.
Oh, I thought, sorry, I was thinking more of the vaccine.
Well, but where it might have a huge effect is on people visiting elderly, dementia-ridden relatives, and, you know, that they haven't seen for months and months and months.
Well, I think they're testing them before they go into the care home.
Well, literally, because of the speed of the test, you could go to the door, get tested,
right,
and be allowed in. Before you greet anybody else. So literally, you would be safe to go in, sit with your relative, go home.
And you would presumably have to go through what do they call the process? You have to take all your clothes off or something in some sort of, and put on some blues or something.
Yeah, I mean, you could go PPE.
You'd have to you know, go into a room, put on PPE, and then go in, because otherwise the test would be pointless.
Yeah, if you were going to be super sensitive about it. But you know, I've no doubt that one or two people will slip through that because nothing's 100% risk-free.
Well, I confess, I mean, the other day I got nervous again and all my shopping was left out for a few hours, and I think I rubbed it all down with sprayed it all before I touched it all again because it's, you know, I had a bit of a bad experience in the supermarket. So it had me leaving, reminded me, well, all of this shopping is a great risk to me. So
Did this COVID committee look much the same as the presser? Or were the questions all quite grown up and sensible?
Mostly sensible, but interestingly, that's a good link for me, Norry, because there was a question. There were two of them were constituency questions. One of them was a guy from Inverclyde, Stewart McMillan, and he was wondering why Inverclyde, although it's in the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board area, has a lower prevalence than the other local authorities, and why can't it be in level 2 instead of level 3? And he was wondering about football and couldn't. There was a fellow, another MSP from Ayrshire, and he was asking about football because junior football is important there. And they were almost like say, well, why can't we be treated more leniently? And that comes back to the one of the main questions of the presser. Of the sensible questions, you could say, by some of the hacks, and they're kind of asking, you know, well, if there's a pubs are opening in Inverness, but they're closed in Glasgow. How are you going to deal with people that might go to Inverness? Are the police going to bust people, and what are they going to? What's the penalty and all the rest of it? And the First Minister quite simply said, if you want to have a variety of restrictions across the country, you need to have a travel ban.
Yeah, or you need to trust people.
Well, you can't completely trust people.
No, but you need to have trust in the majority of people obeying it. Or you go nuclear, you have a lockdown. And then everybody gets to complain, not just certain parts of the country.
Yeah, but then the pendulum swings to the people who live in areas like the Highlands that don't need such a extreme restrictions because they don't have the same prevalence as in Glasgow.
And it'll never seem fair. I mean,
it swings and roundabouts.
The guy from the borders who keeps asking questions about the English border and never asks questions about people from the borders traveling into level 3 lockdown areas in Edinburgh and back is the one that gets me. Every time he asks a question, it's about the English border, never about the border between tier 3 and tier 2.
Strangely, exactly what I thought of. I've written here FFS. Well, you know what that means. Right beside, as soon as they asked this question, I got sick and tired of hearing about that. Nothing else happens in Dumfries and Galloway apart from what goes over the border into Carlisle. They don't have a border with Ayrshire. They don't have a border with Lanarkshire. They don't even have ferry ports to Ireland. Nothing like that. Nothing ever happens. It's all to do with the English border. The man's obsessed.
And apparently none of them travel in any direction but south.
That's exactly my point.
Nobody works in Glasgow.
Yeah, nobody works across the border in any, you know, and they're quite happy to have people come down from Glasgow to go, you know, stop in their hotels and spend their money, apparently, because they haven't complained about that either. You try running that one in the Highlands now.
Yeah, well, that'll be, of course, the next thing. If the touristy areas end up at level 1, or wouldn't it be great if it was level 0, and nobody from the Central Belt's allowed to travel, but English people are.
That's another story.
You know,
I would like to get Peter McMahon, this ITV border journalist, on one of these question times with some responsible local councillor from a Highland village that is determined to keep visitors away, you know, out of the village, and not see how they'd be hitting each other. Give them soft hammers to wallop each other, because they're completely different points of view. I'd
like to point out to him that he's not travelling to the press conferences in Edinburgh from wherever he's based in Dumfries and Galloway.
Oh no, well, if he's at the studios, it's in Carlisle. I've been there.
So he's traveling into an area he's not supposed to travel into, not sitting at home on Zoom.
Don't get me started on that.
How many government rules is he breaking of both governments?
No. He's a television reporter. They are key workers. They've got a letter that allows them to go anywhere they like. Haven't you noticed?
Wow.
And they don't even have, and apparently in this country, they don't even have to wear masks. But you see them in news reports from other countries and they're wearing masks on television. But not in this country. No, they're an elite, you see, because they work for the media.
Aye, well, there's a few questions I'd like to ask them as well.
Don't get me started. However, we must tell the public that there's bad news today in the data.
Oh, there is bad news. 50
deaths today, which was quite shocking. And not only that, the numbers are up to 14. We were down to 919, well, 1,000 new cases the day before yesterday. Yesterday's ones were 1,433. So there were a few questions by the journalists today about the number of deaths, quite rightly too. However, it is a Wednesday, isn't it? And Wednesday's the day to catch up with the unregistered deaths on the weekend, isn't it?
I used to think it was a Tuesday, but I'm going to have a look back at the stats I've got. But that, I mean, that did. I had an intake of breath at that one. However, one less in ICU. Do you know, the other thing that I think about whenever she gives the ICU figures is that one less who's got better or one less who's died?
Well, but that was something else we discovered at the presser, I think, that 50% of the people that go into intensive care with COVID die. I don't think that figure's changed, but I dare say we'll get one of our viewers or listeners will correct me if I'm wrong on that one. Yeah. I thought you might have been quite interested in the fact that the chief fire officer was there today, given that you used to be a firefighter.
I actually didn't. Somebody came to the door, so I presume he was there about November the 5th.
Yes, I was quite surprised, to be honest. I hadn't realized that, well, I knew that organized fireworks events have all been banned. But I hadn't realized that they're expecting lots of garden bonfires. Yeah, and it is a worry. I mean, it's incredible how stupid people are. I've been to bonfires in my fire brigade career that were stacked up against garden sheds. You know, that literally people didn't think if they set fire to a bonfire a foot away from a garden shed, the garden shed would go alight. People can be incredibly silly when it comes to fire. Maybe it's a generational thing. They're not used to, I mean, you know, I probably grew up, oh, maybe not you, but I certainly grew up with a real fire that had to be laid every morning.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Well, yeah, when we heated our homes.
Even as a child, fires, you have respect for real fire.
And things like clothing. It was a warning your mother always gave you, don't go near the fire in case your jammies catch alight.
And especially if you've got loose clothing, you know.
And there'll be a lot of kids have never heard that in their life.
Never heard of it, never thought about it.
So fire aware, I mean, there are a lot less fires. One of the problems in the fire brigade is the amount of experience guys get as firefighters, which, you know, it's a good thing. It's a good problem to have.
But I'm surely they've got different emergencies to deal with now.
Oh yeah, well, the fire brigade covers everything nobody else does. That's
fire and emergency services.
Yeah, but I mean, people think police deal with car crashes. No, they don't. The fire brigade does. Lots of things. Guys stuck on the side of the Castle Rock. Somebody stuck in mud or their foot caught in rocks.
Yeah.
You name it, something that nobody else has the remit.
Unless it's up a mountain and on a coastal cliff, in which case
even up a mountain, the fire brigade can be involved. If there's a specialist organization like Mountain Rescue, it's funny, the number of times in my career that I've sighed a huge sigh of relief when some so-called amateur has turned up who had knowledge of the specific type of incident. And Mountain Rescue is a good incident indicator of that one. But the other one, of course, is the ambulance service, who for many years weren't even considered an emergency service. I mean, you know, people look at me askance when I say that, but it's only in the last 10 years, I think, that they've actually been deemed an emergency service. And that was because governments didn't want to pay them. But if you're at a road traffic accident trying to deal with an injury stuck in a car, I promise you, the relief you feel when an ambulance draws up is immense. I mean, these guys were real heroes. And for years, they were third-class citizens in the emergency services.
That's terrible. Well, what else did we discover at the press briefing? One thing that caught my ear, apparently at the moment, the Scottish Government is supporting businesses without a guarantee, with money, without a guarantee that they get reimbursed by the UK government.
I don't understand this. I really don't. I mean, at the very least, Rishi Sunak should turn around and say, right, England's had a month of the 80% furlough, so everybody else can have a month at any point that it's necessary. That's the very least. But the idea that, I mean, and it's possible, especially with Northern Ireland, you could get a situation where the island of Britain has far lower numbers and something happens in Northern Ireland and they have to go into lockdown. And because there's a big stretch of water between us, it could look entirely different. The idea that the British government wouldn't pay an 80% furlough, that would definitely smack of, well, favoritism, to be blunt. And the north of England, they must be sitting there with steam coming out their ears.
Well, this is the difficulty that one of the difficulties that the Treasury face. If they give money, if they give an open-ended, it's called an open-ended guarantee that the furlough will be extended at 80%, plus support for the self-employed, which the First Minister mentioned today. In the case of Scotland needing a lockdown that England doesn't. Trouble is that the north of England has already been swindled out of backing like that when they were forced into tier 3 before the south of England.
Well, Ian Blackford asked a question at PMQs today and didn't really get an answer.
Oh, I forgot
apparently
PMQs today.
Rishi Sunak's making a statement tomorrow. Apparently, according to the Prime Minister. I'm not sure I believe anything the Prime Minister says.
I'm not sure he knows what's happening, does he? I mean, everybody agrees that there was a setup on Monday in the Commons, and that
even the mainstream media. I think I know what you're going to say, but even Torquil of Daily Record Frame even tweeted about it.
Yeah, they all saw it was always obviously a setup whereby the Prime Minister answered a question from Douglas Ross, his faithful Scottish Tory leader, and so that he got the answer that he wanted from the Prime Minister. Well, it was
the 5th time the question had been answered, I think.
Was it? All kinds of other people had asked it.
I mean, Labour, the SNP, I think even Alistair Carmichael asked the question. And it wasn't until Douglas Ross stood up and asked it that he got an answer that was liked by the Scottish Tories, which was then promptly rowed back from by everybody else except Boris Johnson. Because since that statement, nobody has been willing to say that it would be exactly the same for everyone else without, well, obviously apart from Douglas Ross himself. Talking about lying prime ministers, that gives me the opportunity to talk about the American presidential election. I must admit that I'm very disappointed in our American cousins. Joe Biden, in all the polls, had just under double figures, 7, 8, 9% leads. And it doesn't look like it's translating into actual votes.
I wonder if that's got something to do with an organization like Cambridge Analytica.
I don't think anybody is sure what it's about, but apparently in the important states, well, for instance, Biden was quite hopeful that he would get at least a chance of Florida, nay chance. And in Florida, the Republicans have been door knocking. They've been doing face-to-face canvassing, and it seems to have worked for them. The coronavirus epidemic in America, I would have thought it would have shown up, the incompetence would have shown up in the voting in Florida because of the demographic. An awful lot of people, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people retire to Florida. There's an area called the Villages, which is basically you're not allowed in unless you're over 65, you know. But Biden lost Florida, or Trump won it, I suppose. But they seem to have gauged the voters, the message the voters needed to hear. The Republicans seem to have got that right.
Yeah, well, that's not necessarily true, is it? Because they cheated the last time round. They don't forget, we're talking about social media messaging that was aimed with, similarly in this country, with racist, extremist messages tailored just to the right people that might vote a certain way, and then that they were on social media, and the only people that saw them were the people they were aimed at.
Well, that, and I mean, the other big ploy they used was trying to persuade people who would more likely vote Democratic not to go to the polls.
Not to go to the polls, and plus all kinds of, I have no idea, all kinds of legal ways so that people couldn't register to vote for all some kinds of excuses. I don't know.
Well, the most, I mean, it's nip and tuck on the electoral college system. Biden is winning the popular vote. He's round about 3% ahead of Trump. So he's getting more votes.
It's not enough in the American system.
Well, it doesn't work. You have to get more states. That's the problem.
Well, you have to get more states with...
well, which is why...
Delegates.
What they're calling the red wall districts, Michigan and Pennsylvania and so on.
Wisconsin, yeah. Pennsylvania and Michigan. And I don't know what's happening at the moment.
Well, it is looking good to get Wisconsin.
Who is?
Biden.
Is he?
Yeah. And
Pennsylvania is the big one, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's 20 delegates. So that's also his home area. And it doesn't seem to have helped him much at being his home area. So Biden makes a statement to his people this morning saying, don't give up, folks. There's lots of votes to count. We're quite confident that we're going to make it, blah, blah, blah. Donald Trump gets up and says, they're trying to steal the election from us. We should stop counting now. I don't want any more votes counted because that's them stealing the election. We've already won. So Donald only wants to count the votes that have gone through the polling stations. and all the other votes he wants thrown out because it's a fraudulent election that he at that point was winning. So I don't quite know how you justify winning a fraudulent election because your opponents are fraud.
The risks are even higher than that. I mean, as far as we know, Trump supporters were going to mobilize their armed militias to go to polling stations and destroy ballots.
I've seen no reports of anything like that. There doesn't seem to be much trouble, if any trouble, certainly not reported on the American newscasters that I've seen.
All right.
The bigger worry, well, it's becoming, I think, quite obvious why they insisted on their last placement onto the Supreme Court, because he's already shouting about going to the Supreme Court to get what he wants, which is basically voter suppression. You know,
I'm just, aren't you surprised when a populist fascist like Donald Trump, a gangster, gets control of the most powerful country in the world, that he's not going to use every lever to retain power?
No, what is surprising me is there aren't a majority of Republican supporters, senators, etc., standing up, howling from the rooftops, saying, this isn't right, every vote has to be counted.
The Republican Party, so it was taken up, you got to remember, the Republican Party was challenged 20 years ago by Sarah Palin and the Tea Party. They've taken over the Republican Party now, which is, and you know, and it's not similar to the Blairites taking over the Labour Party, but just generally politically it is. It's been completely taken over by a completely a revolutionary reform party.
Don't forget McCain. Do you remember Senator McCain that had been the prisoner of war during the Vietnam?
Yeah.
The person Donald Trump called a loser. Mm-hmm. His running mate was Sarah Palin. So that extreme right side of the Republican Party was considered good enough to get into the Oval Office, albeit as vice president. But the worrying aspect of this will be if it turns out the Democrats are right and they've got a whole pile of votes sitting in the postal votes waiting to be counted, Donald Trump, if he goes to court, I mean, I don't think he can go directly to the Supreme Court, but if he goes to court asking for votes not to be counted, and the Republicans support that.
Do you remember, how long was it? I mean, it must have been 20 years ago. I forget who it was.
The Bush.
And the hanging Chads.
The Bush.
Was it the Bush one? Which Bush one, though?
Bush the Younger.
You had 4 Bush elections.
Bush the Younger up against, God, I can't remember his name.
The fellow that went on to champion the climate change people.
Well, what happened there was the Supreme Court basically said to Florida, right, you've had enough recounts, stop recounting. Because I think they had 3 recounts and they were going on to their 4th. And the Supreme Court said, right, the last recount's the one that counts, stop counting. And Bush got in by the skin of his teeth. So it's not impossible that we get a situation, say in Pennsylvania, which is not going to have final figures, I don't think, till about Friday.
Look, what's the big issue that directly concerns us in this country? The argument is that if it's a near thing, it will be international recognition of which one has won the election that will make a big difference. And on that basis, the United Kingdom is a big player. Now, which side is a Johnson government going to recognise as the leader, as the winner?
No, I'm sorry. There is no way a British government will recognise anybody that hasn't been legitimately put in place, either by the courts or the electoral system in America. Look, they are not going to come down on one side or the other.
A letter of congratulation is all it's going to take.
No, they won't do that. They will not do that. There's no way.
I wouldn't be so sure.
Well, I'll tell you what now, if they do, they're fools. Until the American system, be that the courts or the democratic electoral system, has a solid decision made, Britain will say nothing. Can you imagine the cost? Imagine they come out and congratulate Biden.
They're not going to come.
No,
it would only be Trump.
Oh no, that's my point. They'll congratulate whoever ends up as president. I mean, that's tradition. That's what they've always done. But imagine they get it wrong. Imagine they congratulate Biden and it ends up being Trump.
They're not going to do Biden. The only people they would support would be Trump.
Well, what are they going to do if Biden gets in?
Yes, but that would be, I'm talking about a situation where it is hanging in the balance.
Well, they can't, they cannot afford to do anything but let it hang in the balance until such time as America decides who their president is. They are not going to jump the gun on this, Stewart.
So who's going to make the decision then about who's going to be president?
Well,
if Trump decides he's not going to leave the White House, if he does a South American
it'll go all the way to the Supreme Court.
He's already built the wall around the White House, so he can bring in the army or his militia to protect him. So they,
Well, he won't be able to sit in the White House if it goes to court. If the Supreme Court give it to Biden, if it comes to that.
I thought the Supreme Court was stuffed with Republicans.
Yeah, it is. But there have been decisions made by these so-called conservative judges that basically follow the letter of the law. If Trump stays in the White House when the vote is against him, I can't see how the Supreme Court.
You have more faith in the law than I have. You just said that an expression, the letter of the law. The law is what people see.
Well, not in America, Stuart. In America, they have the Constitution.
It's still interpreted by human beings.
I don't disagree with you. It is. But if Biden was to win and the Supreme Court, by counting the votes, the only interference that can genuinely change this is if votes don't get counted, right? So if Pennsylvania...
That's not true, Norry, what you've just said. There is a possibility, because it's 0.3% between them in one state, is it Arizona or something? It's so little between them for 10 votes swinging one way, or 10 votes in 10 delegates in Arizona.
Right, so tell me how they gerrymander it if they don't, other than not counting votes.
Well, they may have already gerrymandered. And I mean, look, Trump was never supposed to get this close.
Well, okay. The two ways to do it is to defraud the system, which, I would suggest they already do that by their voter suppression in Republican states.
And yes, we don't know what else they've been up to.
Right. Well, wait a minute. So it's either fraudulently cheating, or another form of cheating is they put some sort of cutoff in to stop legitimate votes being counted.
Well, we've already agreed that they already stopped an awful lot of potential where Biden votes ever being made. People were disenfranchised in huge numbers.
I agree with you, but legally disenfranchised.
Well, it depends what you call legal.
Well, laws were passed in the states that put barriers in the way of people voting.
You think what most people forget is, and I've not even been there are 50 separate states.
And they have 50 different sets of rules.
Exactly.
Which is why
50 different ways to fiddle the system.
Yeah, but they do it legally. They pass laws in legislation by democratically elected people.
Whether it's legal or not is a
it's legal. It might be morally reprehensible.
They pass laws at county level that disenfranchise people from voting.
But it's legal. And if it's not legal, you can take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but by that time, the guy that sits in the White House could even be dead.
Well, it took a long time, the process in Florida, but it was processed. And until such time as that process is exhausted, any British Prime Minister that starts sending out letters or making phone calls of congratulation is a fool. Which does not mean Boris won't do it.
I'm glad you made that point.
But it would be a really stupid thing to do. Because neither Boris nor Trump are particularly happy with Boris at the moment. Because they're looking...
You mean Biden or Trump?
Sorry, Biden. Because what Trump wants is a lapdog that will simply agree with everything he does. And Boris hasn't done that. And what Biden wants is somebody that will support the American view in Ireland. And Boris hasn't done that either.
I hear Steve Bannon, his name has been bandied around in the last couple of days. What's he been up to? How come he's had such a low profile?
Well, he's been interviewed on BBC during this election. He was asked to justify cutting off the time to count the votes. And he sounded very plausible.
Of course, he's quite happy. It's like it's a dead cat, isn't it? Let's talk about cutting off the votes. Let's not talk about the other things they've already done to gerrymander this vote.
Well, I'm beginning, unfortunately, to believe Trump might still do it.
I've always thought he would do it.
Well, I was feeling fairly chirpy at the weekend with the polls that I was seeing. But Biden's path to the White House is getting narrower and narrower. And all the talk about, I mean, Texas, I think there was 7 points in it in Texas. And on Sunday, they were talking about Texas going Democratic. Well, it didn't. Big time didn't. So that's worrying. It must be very worrying for Americans, progressive Americans. Very worrying. So that question of who's going to be the leader of the free world, my God, Donald Trump, leader of the free world twice in a row.
Well,
scary.
Well, at least if the Chinese take over as leader of the world, you're all right if you're an atheist.
Yeah, I've got a wee clip from Jimmy that we could maybe finish off with.
All right, I haven't seen it.
If you give me a second. Here's our good friend Jimmy, who is working at the moment, but took time.
Afternoon, chaps. Just watched Boris tell us that we're now in the middle of an autumn surge.
Give me a minute.
Afternoon, chaps. Just watched Boris tell us that we're now in the middle of an autumn surge. Must say it's the first time I've heard November described as autumn. I take it he takes his propensity for lying an example from his tangerine scrotum in a suit on the other side of the Atlantic. Seems to think that now's the time to stop counting votes because he's in front at the moment. Sorry I can't be with you today, chaps, but I'll do my best for tomorrow. Have fun.
You can always rely on Jimmy to turn a phrase. Anyway, I think we'll call it a day at that, folks. We might have good news from America tomorrow or Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure we're going to have any good news from Westminster anytime soon. So thanks for being with me, Stewart.
No problem, Norry.
I'm Norry Stewart, and thank you for listening, folks. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow for, well, FMQs for certain.
Yeah, FMQs tomorrow. See you.
Okay, we'll see you tomorrow, folks. Cheers for now.